Welcome back to Mega Movies. I'm trying something new here. We're doing a solo stream for me. I'm doing a solo review of Eddington, the upcoming highly anticipated Ari Aster thriller horror action thing. I got the chance to see this early yesterday at the Music Box here in Chicago, and Ari Aster was there in person, so we got to get some interesting insight from him afterwards. He gave us some good commentary in terms of what he might have been intending a little bit. So if you walked out of this a little bit confused, maybe I at least got the chance to hear a little bit from Ari Aster about what he may have been intending to do here. So maybe I can give you some clarity in this review. I'm not going to spoil anything because the movie is not quite out yet for most people here, but I'm going to go through basically my spoiler-free thoughts on some of the characters, some of the themes, how well it handles certain like sensitive topics, things like that, and what you can kind of expect going in to a very divisive and strange movie. If this is your first time here, thanks for coming by. We're happy to see you. We just did a very long live stream of Superman, doing a spoiler talk for that. So if I seem out of it, it's not just Eddington. It's the fact that we just did 3 hours of Superman spoiler talk. So if you're a DC fan, go check out that. I guess I don't know how much DC Eddington crossover there's going to be, but if you're one of those people out there who loved Eddington and also loved Superman, go listen to us talk about it for 3 hours. They're also going to be covering here. I know we did last summer, so if you're a horror movie fan, they're covering that here this weekend as well. So check that out here at Mega Movies. But look, no more delay. But Ari Aster's Eddington's been so anticipated for so long. It's been even prior to Beau Was Afraid, he was working on this as like a passion project, something that really resonated with him about where he came from in New Mexico, the people that were around him in his life then. And he paused it to make Beau and then kind of came back to it, especially, in the hindsight of how things have gone down politically in post COVID America. So look, if you weren't happy with the politics in the Superman review, just click off now because it's going to be political here. I'm not going to spoil how it goes down in terms of how things play out in the movie, but we know how things play out in real life. So I'm going to talk about 2020. I'm going to talk about Trump. I'm going to talk about COVID. I'm going to talk about conspiracy theorists. A lot of things you might not want to talk about. So if that's something you're uncomfortable with, steer away from this review and also this movie because this movie is set in about prime time for offending people. It's set in very early 2020, right as the COVID pandemic is breaking out, and it's set in a small town following Ted Garcia, played by Pedro Pascal. He's running for re-election as mayor in this town. He's one of those mayors that's kind of like run opposed every election he runs, but he doesn't really expect anybody to run against him, let alone stand a chance against him. He's the town favorite. Everybody kind of likes him. He's that soft-spoken, kind-hearted, on the face of a Democrat who is really about enforcing these COVID mandates and really about posing for the camera with his mask on, making sure everybody sees that he has the mask on when he's even out in public reading and stuff like that. He opposing kind of liberal type of character who then gets faced off against by Joaquin Phoenix, who plays this right wing sheriff. He's kind of infamous in this town and everywhere around this town of Eddington for being kind of crazy and stern and really intense about his beliefs. And those beliefs just don't quite align with COVID-19 and wearing masks all the time. And he has this confrontation at the very beginning of the movie about having to wear a mask. And this confrontation ultimately inspires him to run for mayor. So he becomes the opposing candidate against Pedro Pascal's reigning mayor. And you follow the relationship of these two men, these two opposing worldviews, as this election spirals and spirals out of control. So if you are someone who had a hard time during 2020 and during COVID, this is a movie that takes you right back to that experience, the visceral, like surreal experience of living through that and going through every single day feeling like the world is essentially ending around you. You don't know what's going to happen next, and you're walking through. Like when I was working during that time, I was delivering food, and I would go to like malls that were once packed with thousands of people, that are now abandoned, and there's like a very eerie feeling to that. And Ari Aster captures that eerie, like abandoned feeling within this movie very well, but he also captures that quiet building of tension that was also there at this time, where stuff like BLM is breaking out during this time, and that absolutely factors into Eddington. We're following police officers and we follow their reactions to this, them trying to distance themselves from the BLM police while also trying to use the system to their advantage at the same time, really speaking out of both ends of their mouth. A fascinating look to me at how COVID was not how we responded to COVID was not necessarily about COVID itself. It ended up being about all of these other issues that were manifesting in these relationships and in these systems that we weren't really talking about. And COVID inspired us to talk about them. And what this movie, I think, captures more than anything is that everybody and all of their perspectives exist within our specific reality. Like my reality of what I think is true and what I think is not true, what I think is wrong, what I think is right. It's my specific perspective, and no one else is going to have that perspective but me. And COVID really enhanced those bubbles. It made those bubbles thicker. And I think this movie shows that the results of isolation and consumerism and like rugged individualism, all of that pushing together, the inevitable result of that is violence. If you tell people that your reality is the right reality, everybody else's reality is wrong, they're going to do anything in their power to like maintain that reality. And what made this movie so scary to me is how it captured that swing of you root for a person and then you don't root for a person, and you believe what a person is saying and then you don't believe what a person is saying. And that was such a fascinating element of this movie. Ari Aster, his movies take you on such wild pendulum swings in terms of tone, in terms of style, in terms of what he's trying to say. You walk into something like Beau is Afraid, and what you get in minute one is not necessarily what you're getting, in minute, 300 or whatever at the end. And this movie goes for that too. Like the swings this movie takes, you will not believe. It's difficult to talk about this movie's plot and structure without going into spoilers in terms of reveals and in terms of twists, because this movie has huge twists and huge turns and things you would never have expected to see. So go into this one as blind as you can in that respect, because it's going to show you stuff we don't expect to see. My biggest advice, honestly, is to prepare yourself for that pendulum swing. Prepare yourself to, at one point, maybe hate this movie. At one point, maybe hate this character. And then at another point, really love and root for this character or love and root for this movie. It it paints with a broad stroke in terms of these characters are not necessarily super complex. You have the old lady who's rambling about conspiracy theories, and you have the charismatic but not super intelligent like online guy who can drop a following by saying really nice things but doesn't really have much to actually say. And you have the angry gun loving right wing sheriff who just doesn't want to wear a mask. And those feel like broad strokes, but he does an interesting job of complexing. He does an interesting job of making these characters complex, where you understand that in their perspective, they just had their reality shifted. Everything they believed in is now changed because of what has been happening around them, and how we responded to that is ultimately what defines us as people. How we respond to this specific moment that this movie captures, this moment of 2020, how you reacted in that moment, very much so, I think, defines not just you, but defines like our culture in our country, right? And this movie, it works as a period piece because it captures what it was like to live through that moment, to have that tension and that anxiety. But I also hope it works as sort of a warning piece, like something we can look back on in 20 years and be like, thank God we didn't let ourselves get to that point again. Thank God this was just a moment in time and not what we became, right? And COVID is something that we have a hard time digesting in movies. It hasn't been portrayed in much depth. Like it's there sometimes in the surface. Like maybe characters are wearing masks. Maybe they mention how having to be isolated. Maybe they shot the movie on Zoom. Like something like Host. I've never seen a movie so directly and specifically engage with COVID, not as a metaphor, not as anything other than what it is. And that's going to turn people off. If you're watching this expecting it to be very genre heavy, if you're watching this expecting it to be like a romp all the time. It is fun. It's very, very funny. And there's action, there's crazy stuff you won't expect to see. But this movie is about COVID-19, and it's about how we responded to COVID-19 and what COVID-19 awakened within us, like as a culture, as a people, and how Ari Aster mentioned in the Q&A that what this movie is changed a lot as like the news evolved. You know, if you're writing a movie like this and that not just COVID is changing, but the politics are changing. And if you're looking at this as like a Trump metaphor, Trump is back in the White House, and I'm sure that changed how he wrote parts of this movie too. But for an ever evolving issue, I think this movie does a fascinating job of capturing like a very specific moment in how he felt about it. So if you are interested in seeing Ari Aster take a crazy, unhinged dive into how we kind of had like an American meltdown during COVID, everybody kind of lost their way. You know what? That's what I appreciate about this movie too. It's not necessarily like, oh, only the right went crazy, only the left went crazy, only centrists went crazy. One version is right, one version is wrong. It doesn't necessarily take a huge stance like that. It just looks at how everybody kind of went crazy. And I appreciated that, I guess, where such a touchy issue when you compare it to something like Civil War, where I think Civil War similarly tries to avoid taking a stance, but I think it fails in doing that because it kind of tries to like tee hee ha ha take a stance here and there, you know. And this movie doesn't do that. It just presents you these very complex characters who make huge mistakes and don't always pay for those mistakes. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. So this is not a straightforward movie in terms of its morality. I think that may be why it's just so divisive. It's dealing with such a touchy issue, and it's not taking extremely firm stances in terms of let's make sure you know this character is wrong. Let's make sure you know this character is right. It's not projecting how you're supposed to feel. And there absolutely are moments in this where you're supposed to question how you feel. So Ari Aster is in such an interesting place in his career to make something like this that is so unapologetically about COVID in a time when people feel afraid to talk about it. People seems to want to move on and pretend that COVID was not a thing that happened. But Ari Aster's movie is very much about how we have to remember that this happened. We have to look at how we reacted and what our response was and make something more of that. You know, I really want to talk about just the craft of this movie now that we've gone through all of the thematic fun. I'm going to talk just about the actual filmmaking here because Joaquin Phoenix as a center of this is just electric, man. He's the center of this whole universe. I talked about how we all feel like we're part of our own little realities, and I think that's reflected within the context of this movie. Joaquin Phoenix is what this movie is about. He is the center of this thing. If you're going to this saying, "Oh, I can't wait to see," any of the other cast members, Pedro Pascal's in it a lot, but if you're going into it saying like, "Oh, I can't wait to see Austin Butler. I can't wait to see any of these other characters," they'll come in when they're meant to be there, but they're not necessarily going to be huge parts of it. For me, the standout, surprisingly, was someone that I don't think I'd even seen in anything else. It was someone who played the cop. He's like a kind of very, very new police officer on the force. He's been there for maybe like a year or so. His father was on the force. He's played by Michael Ward. His character's name is actually also Michael. He's a young sheriff's trainee who is a black man, and of course, as a black cop living through the rise of the BLM movement in the terms of 2020, you really get a lot of perspective through this guy. You get not just his perspective changing a little bit, growing in terms of how he views the issues, but how people in the town view him changes, right? How the crowd views him changes, how his coworkers view him kind of changes in subtle ways, in small ways that really reflect what I think this movie is trying to say about how all of these internal issues, all these unspoken divisions, all of these things that make our bubbles firmer, that's what COVID really was about. It wasn't about the virus. The virus is almost like this big red herring that is used to make the town face all of its other divisions. So if you want to see a town kind of just go through a meltdown, check this one out. Joaquin Phoenix is an incredible lead. The score here has moments that are just so blasting and so crazy. You won't believe the sound design here in some of the moments. The trailer shows you quite a lot of the action stuff with the guns. Otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily bring that up. But yeah, the guns sound incredible in here. It sounds as good as anything you'd get in Civil War. So there's not a ton of action. If you watch the trailer and you were like, "Oh, he bursts out with a machine gun," I can't wait to see Ari Aster do like an action movie. It's not an action movie. There's like violence in it, but it's not at all an action movie. But it's more so a character drama. It's exploring Joaquin Phoenix's character specifically and how this isolation spirals him, but also how it brings out issues that were within him the whole time. If you want to see Joaquin Phoenix as a centerpiece that's just so incredible, he's the reason to watch this. In terms of my negatives, I think it can feel too long, especially in the middle. I think there's parts within the middle where like you're following Joaquin Phoenix's character from his car all the way up to the door of his house, and then he'll do something at the house, and you'll follow him all the way back. And I'm thinking, like, did we have to follow him there, follow him back? That there's moments there where I think you could have like chopped it up if you really wanted to quicken things. You know, it's 2.5 hours. Did it really need to be 2.5 hours? There's elements, especially in that middle, that drag. But at the same time, I mentioned that pendulum swing, and the lulls in the plot I think really help you ride that pendulum. The tonal swings of dark and light, laugh out loud ridiculous. The first act of this especially is just so funny. You won't believe, like, the South Park kind of humor they go for here with just, broad swings at people, people you are. You'll see yourself in some of these characters for sure. But if you can laugh at yourself and you can laugh at how we overreacted in certain ways to, the shutdown, everybody panicked in certain things. If you can laugh about that, you'll have a great time, especially with the first half of this movie. And it does take a crazy, wild turn that's been teased by the trailers. So to me, how you feel about this movie will definitely come down to how you feel about that turn. The turn is so sharp, and it takes an adjusting to. If you've seen the trailers, you're probably a little more prepared than I was in terms of where this is going to go in tone and in violence. But if you're not ready for that, it takes you a second to recognize what you're watching for a while. But I highly recommend this thing if you can stomach what it's about. I think you may not like it, but I highly recommend watching it. I think it'll make you think. It has me thinking and rambling right now. I talked about so much that seemed like it wasn't necessarily even part of the movie, but it's what the movie is inspiring you to think about, right? And when you walk out of something like Civil War, I'm talking about how cool it looked. I'm talking about how fun the production was. I'm not really caring about the themes it has to supposedly say. And this, it's almost the opposite. I walk out and the production is good, but it's much more so about what I think what Ari Aster is trying to say here about how we responded to this, how we interact with each other, and ultimately what like unchecked, rugged individuality leads to. This is called a modern Western, and I think when you look at the Western as this preamble to America, this early origin story to like what our country would grow into, and the ruggedness of the Wild West, like these traditional archetypes, these men who were manly men and the women who were womanly women, whatever you want to say about that. But I think if it's placed a modern Western, it takes those archetypes and shows you what they're like now. It takes those really broad stroke characters and puts them in the modern context. And when you look at like the landscape of the West and how that presented, like I mentioned, an origin story to the U.S., this show is almost like the result of that. The result of the rugged individuality, I can do whatever I want, Wild West evolved into an actual fully built up country and what that looks like now. I really was fascinated by this thing. It goes for the jokes, it goes for the broad comedy. I think that makes it very unique for an Ari Aster movie, where something like Bow is Afraid, like Hereditary, even Midsommar, they seem to have a lot of layers beneath them, where like it's genre on the surface, and then beneath it is like, oh, it's actually about relationships, so it's actually about this. This is different, where what it's about is the themes. What it's about is COVID. The genre stuff seems to take much more of a backseat than the last three Ari Asters did. So if you want to see something confrontational, if you want to see something that forces you to talk about divisive issues, forces you to remember a hard time in your life, forces you to not forget what we did to ourselves, what we did to each other in this time, but also is just so much fun. It will remind you how ridiculous that time was, how absurd and how surreal it was, how genuinely funny it was to see all of this happening at once. It captures all of that surreal and unstable, emotional landscape of 2020. It makes you cry, it makes you scream, it makes you cheer, it makes you feel like you're watching the worst movie ever made, and then it makes you feel like maybe it was amazing. So I highly recommend this. I really, really liked it. Like I mentioned, even if you don't like it, I think you should watch it because it's something fascinating. And I think when Beau Was Afraid didn't necessarily do very well in the theater, I think this one has to do well. Ari Aster is going to be looking at a different career. I mean, not a different career. He's still going to be directing, but it's a different scale of a career, right? He's going to probably be working at a much smaller budget if this one doesn't pan out for him. So go see Eddington. Like I said, let yourself ride that pendulum swing. Don't judge the movie in the middle of the movie or 75% of the way through the movie. Judge the movie when you're done, when you're on the ride home, when you've thought about the movie, because it takes you through a lot. And if you're willing to take that ride and go for what it is, I think whether you like it or hate it or love it, you're gonna have something to think about, and you're gonna absolutely be on the way home wanting to talk about it. So if you want to talk about it, let me know in the comments what you thought. I tried to keep this one nice and quick, only about 20 minutes going on, spoiler free about Eddington. I tried not to say very much. Hope I didn't spoil anything for you guys. I tried to be very, very vague and just talk about what I felt, what I thought the movie was trying to say. I didn't really want to give plot spoilers away. So hopefully you guys see this one. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Ari Aster movies are, and if you're gonna if you're gonna be seeing Eddington this weekend. It's coming out, if you can believe it, this weekend. Check it out at a local theater. See if you have an indie theater that's showing it as well, so you can support some indie theaters out there while you're supporting some indie cinema. Be civil in those comments. Don't bring up anything too crazy. Don't get us shut down or nothing, But talk it out. Let me know how you felt about Eddington. I'm still going to be processing it. I can't wait to talk this one out throughout the rest of the year. I'm sure we're going to be talking about it a lot on this channel once we get to like best of the year. Someone will be talking about it. Maybe worst of the year, someone will be talking about it. But I'm sure if you see it, you will have strong, strong feelings about it. So let me know in the comments if you see it, what you thought. If you, like I said, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff here. So subscribe if you want to check out what we're going to be reviewing throughout the month. I know what we did last summer is coming up. Fantastic Four is really not that far away at this point. It's a stacked summer. It's a stacked year. So come check it out here at Mega Movies. Give us a subscribe. Let me know if I did a good job. I haven't reviewed something solo in a really long time. I'm sure I rambled a lot, but give me some feedback and I'll consider it. Have a great day, guys. Don't go too crazy. Love each other and have a good one.